There's a specific kind of sadness that doesn't have a funeral. No one sends flowers. No one checks in. No one asks how you're doing. Because from the outside, nothing happened. The person is still alive. They still exist somewhere in the world. You might even still see them, still exchange words, still smile across a table at holidays. But something ended. Something real and irreversible quietly closed. And you felt it before you had the language for it. This is the silent grief of outgrowing people you once loved. And it is grief. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. We talk endlessly about losing people to death, to distance, to betrayal. Society has rituals for those losses. We know how to grieve them, but no one prepares you for the specific heartbreak of growing in a direction someone you love simply cannot follow. No one tells you that becoming more yourself might mean becoming a stranger to people who once knew you completely. And no one warns you about the guilt, that slow, suffocating guilt that makes you question whether growth was worth it at all. Let's sit with that for a moment, because if you're here, chances are you already know exactly what this feels like. Maybe it's a childhood friend you've slowly stopped calling. Maybe it's a family member whose worldview has started to feel like a cage. Maybe it's someone you once loved so completely that you built your entire identity around them. And now you look at them and feel the terrifying distance of two people standing on different shores, watching the water between them grow wider with every passing year. And the grief isn't just for them. It's for the version of you that existed inside that relationship. The you who laughed at those jokes. The you who shared those dreams. The you who felt at home in their presence. That version of you is gone too, and no one ever tells you that you're allowed to mourn them. So let's talk about what's actually happening, psychologically, emotionally, and deeply humanly, when you outgrow someone you love. The first thing to understand is that outgrowing is not a choice. Not a conscious one, anyway. Psychologists who study identity development, particularly Erik Erikson and later James Marcia, describe the self as something that doesn't solidify once and remain fixed. Identity is a living system. It evolves in response to experience, suffering, insight, and exposure to new ways of understanding the world. Every time you go through something that breaks you open, a loss, a crisis, a period of deep introspection, you are neurologically and psychologically becoming a different person. Not metaphorically, literally. Your neural architecture shifts. Your values reorganize. Your tolerance for certain dynamics narrows. And your appetite for depth, truth, and authentic connection grows. That process is beautiful in isolation, but it becomes painful the moment you look up from your own evolution and realize that not everyone has been traveling with you. Some people stay exactly where they were, and that's not a flaw in them. That's important to say clearly. People grow at different rates through different catalysts or sometimes not at all, and none of that makes them lesser. But it does make them incompatible with who you are becoming. And incompatibility, even when it isn't anyone's fault, still hurts. Here's what makes this grief so complicated. When someone dies or betrays you or leaves, the loss has a clear cause. Your pain has somewhere to point. But when you outgrow someone, the loss is diffuse, creeps in. It shows up as a conversation that feels hollow where it once felt full. It shows up as the subtle exhaustion after spending time with someone you used to feel energized by. It shows up as silence, not comfortable silence, but the kind that stretches between two people who have run out of shared language. Psychologists call this relational drift, the gradual misalignment of two people's values, growth trajectories, and emotional needs over time. It's one of the most common and least discussed forms of relationship dissolution. And what makes it so quietly devastating is that there's no moment of rupture to point to, no dramatic falling out, just a slow, almost imperceptible widening of the space between you. And then one day you realize you're not just drifting, you're on different continents. What happens inside you during that process is worth paying attention to. In the early stages, most people try to bridge the gap. You reach back, you try to resurrect the old dynamic, recreate the old feeling, speak the old language. You tell yourself that the connection is still there, just buried, just dormant, just waiting. You make excuses for the dissonance. You minimize your own evolution to stay palatable to someone who hasn't grown alongside you. You make yourself smaller so the relationship can feel bigger. And for a while it works, or it looks like it does. But here's the truth that no amount of effort can outrun. You cannot sustainably compress your consciousness. You cannot indefinitely pretend to care about things that no longer move you. You cannot keep shrinking yourself to fit into a space your growth has already exceeded. Eventually, the inauthenticity becomes unbearable. And that's when the grief shifts from quiet to acute. Because now you're not just grieving the person. You're grieving the effort. All those years of reaching back, of trying, of hoping that one more conversation, one more shared memory, one more vulnerable moment might close the gap. You're grieving the fantasy that you could stay the same and become yourself simultaneously. You can't. And accepting that is one of the most quietly devastating realizations a person can come to. There's a concept in Jungian psychology called the individuation process, the deep psychological work of integrating all the fragmented, disowned, and undeveloped parts of the self into a coherent whole. Jung believed this was the central work of human life. Not achievement, not success, not belonging, but becoming fully, authentically yourself. And one of the most consistent features of the individuation journey is relational loss. Not because becoming yourself makes you selfish or cold, but because the more fully you inhabit yourself, your real values, your real needs, your real vision for your life, the less you can tolerate relationships built on performance, habit, or mutual avoidance of truth. You stop being able to laugh things off that aren't funny to you anymore. You stop being able to nod along to beliefs that contradict everything you've come to understand. You stop being able to perform closeness with someone when all you feel is distance. That's not hardness, that's honesty, but it comes at a price. And sometimes the price is the relationship itself. Now let's talk about the guilt, because for many people, this is where the grief gets trapped. There's a particular psychological torment that comes with outgrowing people you love. It lives in the space between knowing you've changed and fearing that your change is somehow an act of violence against them. As if your growth is a rejection. As if your evolution is a criticism. As if who you've become is implicitly saying that who they are isn't enough. That's not what it means. But it can feel that way. And sometimes, honestly, they feel it that way too. People who are left behind in the relational drift sometimes respond with resentment. They sense the distance even when they can't name it. They feel the change in you before you've articulated it yourself. And some will interpret your growth as abandonment. They'll call you arrogant, difficult, too serious, too different, too much. And that accusation, coming from someone who once knew you completely, has a particular kind of sting. Because part of you will wonder if they're right. That's the cruelest dimension of this grief. The self-doubt it seeds. The question of whether your growth is real or just elaborate self-delusion. Whether you've genuinely evolved or simply become someone who mistakes distance for depth, isolation for independence, detachment for wisdom. These are important questions to sit with, but they are not proof that your growth isn't real. Here's how you know the difference. If your growth has brought you more honesty, more compassion, more accountability for your own inner world, that's real. If it has made you more curious, more present, more capable of genuine intimacy, even if with fewer people, that's real. Growth that moves toward truth is real, even when it's painful, even when it's lonely, even when it costs you. What isn't growth is using distance as armor, using evolution as an excuse to avoid vulnerability. That's not expanding, that's contracting in the direction of pride. Real growth always moves toward more aliveness, not less connection. But genuine outgrowing, the kind we're talking about, that is a movement toward more connection. Just not with everyone, with the right ones, with the ones who are also willing to live honestly, grow consciously, and meet you where you actually are instead of where you used to be. And finding those people after losing the old ones is its own kind of long, quiet grief process. Because the loneliness of outgrowing is real. There's a particular loneliness that comes in that liminal space, the territory between who you were and who you're fully becoming. You've released enough of your old self that the old world no longer fits, but you haven't yet fully arrived in the new one. You're between. And in between is a very quiet, very exposed place to be. You attend gatherings and feel like a visitor in a world you used to belong to. You have conversations that skim the surface while something in you aches for depth. You watch people you love live in ways you've grown past, and you feel simultaneously tender toward them and silently devastated by the gap. That's not superiority. Please don't mistake it for that. It's mourning. It's the specific, untranslatable ache of carrying love for someone in one hand and incompatibility in the other, and not knowing what to do with either. And the hardest truth is this: sometimes you don't do anything. Sometimes the most loving thing you can offer is not a confrontation, not a conversation, not a grand attempt at rekindling. Sometimes it's simply allowing the relationship to settle into a new, quieter form. One that honors what it was without pretending it is still what it was. One that loves from a respectful distance. One that wishes them well without requiring that the well-wishing be returned in kind. That is grief made into grace. But how do you actually move through this? Not over it, not around it, through it. The first thing is permission. You have to give yourself permission to grieve something that no one else recognizes as a loss. In a culture obsessed with dramatic ruptures, the quiet dissolution of a relationship that no one else noticed is often invisible. Even to the people closest to you, you may not receive the condolences. You may not be offered the space to fall apart. So you have to create that space for yourself. Name it, say it out loud, or write it down. This relationship has changed. This person and I are no longer who we were to each other, and I am allowed to feel the weight of that. The second thing is honesty about what you're actually grieving, because it's rarely just the person. It's the version of yourself that existed in that relationship. It's the chapters of your life stored in that shared history. It's the future you once imagined together that will no longer come to pass. That's multiple layers of loss, and each one deserves to be acknowledged separately, not collapsed into a single vague sadness. The third thing is patience with your own ambivalence. You can love someone deeply and still know the relationship has run its course. You can be grateful for what someone gave you and still feel the truth that what they can give you now isn't what you need. You can hold someone in your heart and still release them from your daily life. Grief doesn't require closure. It requires honesty. And finally, trust. Trust that the relationships which align with who you are becoming are not less valid because they're newer. Trust that depth is not measured in years but in authenticity. Trust that the people meant to accompany the next chapter of your life are already forming on the horizon, drawn by the signal of who you're becoming rather than who you used to be. Because here's what often goes unsaid in these conversations. Outgrowing someone is not only a loss, it is also a proof of life. It means you are genuinely, courageously, painfully alive in your own becoming. It means you haven't stagnated. It means you chose truth over comfort, even when comfort was dressed in the face of someone you loved. That takes more courage than most people realize. And it is worthy of recognition, not just mourning. The grief is real. Honor it. But so is the growth. And in the quietest, most private part of yourself, you already know it was necessary. You didn't outgrow them to abandon them. You outgrew them because life, in its relentless and generous insistence, refused to let you stay small. And somewhere ahead, on the other side of this particular grief, there is a version of you who is more honest, more whole, more capable of the kind of love that doesn't require you to disappear inside it. That version of you is worth the cost of getting there, even when the cost is this. If this video taught you something new, give it a like and subscribe for more psychology content that will change the way you see yourself and others.